So welcome to the AFT Construction Podcast. And today I'm excited to present one of my really good friends that I've known for quite some time now, Mr. Jason Black, who's president and owner of Artisan Signature Homes. So welcome, Jason.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to finally connect with you on your podcast, man. I've been enjoying a lot of your great episodes. So fun to be a part of it.
Well, thanks for the support. And of course, you're rocking that beautiful hat. So for those tuning in on YouTube, they're going to be able to see that nice AFT hat you got on.
That's right. This dates back a few years, but I wear it with pride.
Well, that's great. So let me ask you this, Jason. I mean, I want to dive into, I've always aspired, I think when we first met through Instagram, even before we met in person, out at Cambria that we'll dive into, but you really had this presence on social media, and we'll get into that because I think you have a lot to offer, especially builders trying to figure out how to present themselves. When you're a designer architect, it's easy to do that. But before we do that, I want to dive into construction a little bit. And so you have some amazing designs, right, that really speak to a lot of designers, architects, and the general public. And so are these typically spec homes that you're doing, or are these built to suit for clients?
So we do a combination of build to suit with clients. We've got some amazing clients, but then we also, we're close with my wife, Gretchen, who does interior design. And we, almost all of our spec homes, her and I kind of collaborate on the design. And what we're looking for, it's an opportunity for me. I consider it almost my laboratory. So I'm experimenting with what I think is going to be something new or different, and not so much trendy, but all my stuff, I try to be classic and tried and true, but still a little bit maybe cutting edge. Or, we're in Louisville, Kentucky, so we're not the West Coast, we're not the East Coast, but I still get inspired by all those designs. And so we use those spec homes as an opportunity to really influence the design of our customers and apparently a few others out there.
So I guess the question is, when you talk about experiment, you definitely have a little bit more flexibility when you're doing a spec, right? And because you can make those own decisions, you can kind of create the timelines and everything behind the scenes. So what's the intent? Is the intent to utilize the creativity for marketing purposes? Is it for to try just new construction techniques or design elements? What is kind of the thinking behind it?
So the intent is, I really appreciate good design, no matter what the style is. So the intent is to try to do something that is just different. I get bored. Somebody told me I could make $1 billion building the same plan a million times. I'd probably say yes, but it wouldn't excite me, So
but there's some truth there. If I interrupt you, I know what you mean. It's like, yeah, there's the money side, which some people chase that, but that doesn't really bring the happiness, right, or the day-to-day complexity. And what you're saying is, I'd rather do something a little more challenging and not so much chase that dollar.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that has contributed to our success is I've definitely not chased the dollar. I've always sacrificed the dollar, the monetary aspect, for good design, maybe to a flaw, but that's what I enjoy to do. So that's what I'm going to do. And I mentioned we build the spec homes, but I'd say probably 25% of our business is spec homes. The other 75% are custom builds for clients. And, I have some clients that are very set in their way, that have a great vision that I help carry out. But then I have others that, they may come to me because of Instagram or because they've seen something, and they just say, hey, I want what you do. Just create me something. And it could be one picture they've given me or nothing. And I'll, sit with them and just understand what's important to them. And then I'll run with the design and try to create something for them that is different from their neighbor. It always cracks me up when the builders in a certain market will copy other builders in that market and do the same thing. And I'm like, be a little bit different, maybe go to a different market. Or, prior to 2020, we traveled a ton and used our opportunity to travel to look at different designs and bring those back to Louisville and kind of put our spin on it.
No, I love that. And I guess before I dive into that, because I have some questions about the design side, but what I really liked you touched on, Jason, I think is really important. You talked about that you sacrifice dollar for good designs. And it's funny because, in a lot of meetings, at least with people that I've networked with, they use the term in sales, loss leader, right? And sometimes you take a project and you're not chasing the dollar. You may not make money. It's an investment but it may get you into a community you want to build in. It may get you into a network you want to build in. Or in your case, we may do a design that's different that's going to put us on the map. And that's where I think a lot of people in business, they worry about the bottom line and they don't think about long term, right? If I'm investing in my business, investing in myself, I'm betting on myself, it's okay to maybe not make a dollar today because in the future this is going to compound and now build that platform. And I feel that's what you've done as I've followed you for the last 4 years. I've seen your business grow, Jason, where now you're doing these amazing projects. And I feel that you really understood that term loss leader and you've applied that to what you're doing now.
Well, it's funny. We built one of the first show homes we did. This is dating back probably 10 years ago. And we did an amazing show house. It was, won best of show, won all these awards. We built it as a spec home and we didn't sell it. It didn't sell because, we overbuilt probably for the lot and for the neighborhood, but man, was it a cool house. And I was talking to the builder next door, and this is after the show. He had sold his house and we were just talking. And I said, "How was the show for you?" He's like, "Man, great. I sold my house. I made X% and I'm stoked." I was like, "Oh man, that's awesome." I said, "Did you get any new leads off the show house?" He's like, "No, but man, I think he was saying, man, I made 20% or something." And I was like, "Okay." He said, "How about you?" He's like, "Man, we haven't sold it yet, but I've got over a dozen leads from this show house." And he's like, "Man, a dozen, so that's a perfect example of short-sightedness. He was worried still on that show house. And obviously you've got to build, you've got to make money if you want to be in business for any amount of time. So the dollar is important, but there is definitely an opportunity for a loss leader, and you got to pick and choose those projects that make sense to, make it a loss leader. Or it doesn't have to be a loss leader, but maybe you make a few less percentage points because you put a cedar roof on it, or you do Cambria quartz in the kitchen, or you do something a little bit different than the competition is doing.
No, I love that you share that, Jason. It's funny because we had a very similar example. We had a project that I knew going in, the client was very adamant how much they wanted to pay their builder, and it was limited. And I knew going in that this was not going to be a project that we were going to net any dollars, hopefully break even just on what they were. But it gave us the opportunity to break into this community that we had wanted to be in. And fortunately, not only did the home turn out amazing, but as you mentioned, we, with some of our vendors that were involved, Cambria and some other ones, this ended up being nationally published, through their assistance and ended up putting us on the map, if you will. And so I think anyone listening, I mean, whether you're a designer, architect, builder, it doesn't matter, even a small business owner, look at those strategic, opportunities that are out there. As Jason said, dollars important, but it's not everything. And I guess so as we move this conversation along, I mean, getting into the design side, I mean, you have a big input on that, Jason. You have good taste. You have a good eye for that, which I think comes natural to you. Your wife is a designer. So do you typically have designers on every project? Or I know Gretchen's involved with you, and this is kind of a multi-layered question, or are you ever doing projects where you're acting as a designer builder for the client?
So there's a couple things we have on every project we do. One is a great builder, obviously. The second is a great architect, and we use C3 architecture a lot with our designs. And then we always make our clients have an interior designer with our projects. So we found over the years, I mean, you just learn and you get better as time goes on. And our most successful projects are the ones that run smoothly. Decisions are hopefully made on time. We still struggle with that sometimes, but having the designer in there really helps that homeowner who probably has great taste, has a great vision, but it's just pulling everything together and making sure the whole house coordinates and you don't have a little mismatch from room to room. So we feel it's important to have that designer, whether it's Gretchen, who helps me on a good portion of them, but she can't do them all. And she'd rather do a couple of them, do them really well, than, we do some fun houses that take just a lot of time from the designer's perspective. So we share that out. We probably have 3 to 4 designers that we work with regularly. And then we've worked with, a handful of others over the years.
I love that you had that philosophy. And it's funny, I think both you and I learn over the years, like in the beginning you want a job and the client's like, well, I don't need a designer. Okay, well, we want the job. We're going to figure it out. And then it is so strikingly painful to like get to the finish line. And I found that we have the same philosophy, especially in the last 2 years, that if they don't have a designer, then we're not the builder for you. Like, don't even entertain that. And I know I've had some clients push back, and we've had to help them understand the value, because the reality is I can build a home faster. I can build it more efficiently. It's more cost advantageous to the client, and it's a more it's a better relationship with the client, right? And so I'm sure you can attest to that. And so how do you balance? Because one of the questions I get from a lot of builders too is, okay, Brad, it's great to have a designer, and I understand that it can build quicker, and you have specifications, and it makes the communication better with your subs. How do you manage the budget? How, especially at the beginning, because Jason, you get involved at the very beginning with your clients. So how do you create that budget, and how do you make sure that it's going to fit with the design?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's still not a perfect process because, everybody's budget, it seems to change through the process. So we try to get a general idea. And sometimes it's tough because clients don't want to share their budget. And so I poke and prod and say, well, here's a house we did that's, it's probably 1.5 million. Is that in the ballpark? So if they don't give me a number, I really try to get a number out of them, because I'm in the business of building houses, not designing houses. So over the years, I've built a fair number of houses that just didn't get built that I thought were great houses, but they ended up over budget, or just, the scope creep changed. So we try to get that budget up front. And then we spend an average of 4 to 6 months of pre-construction before we actually start building. So with the architectural drawings, once we have the plans that are, I'm going to say 3 to 4 revisions in, we've got a solid floor plan, we've got a solid elevation. We will then get our homeowner paired up with our designer. We'll go make selections for cabinetry, tile, appliances, countertops, all those items that can really drive the budget. I say up or down, but it's really drive that budget up. We want our clients to touch and feel those budget numbers. So when we get to the point where we're signing a contract, it's probably going to be a little bit more than what they originally anticipated, but they're almost avoiding the change orders down the road. They're doing them up front. So I would rather, before somebody signs a contract and commits 100%, I want to be realistic with them to say, hey, I think your house is going to cost this. Well, I don't think I know what it's going to cost, and we'll guarantee them, hey, this is what it's going to cost. Unless you change something or do a major addition to the project, this is going to be your budget. I tell people, you can sign the contract. You can go to Arizona for a year, and play, and we'll build the house for you, and it'll be on budget, and, you'll already have it pre-picked out. It doesn't always work that smooth, but we try to do more and more upfront work before we start construction.
Oh, it's so valuable. I think creating those expectations really helps too. So in that 4 to 6 months, how involved or how detailed, without giving away all your company secrets, I guess, are you breaking down, per line item of saying, hey, in the laundry, we can go a little more extravagant, and we can have, $30 a square foot for tile for the flooring, or, this backsplash in the kitchen or kids' bathroom. I mean, how detailed do you get, or are the designers asking to help them stay at least somewhat close to that overall budget?
Yeah. So ideally, we build the budget as we go, and we'll try to give them certain parameters so they don't pick a high-end marble in every single bathroom. So we may say, hey, the master, we've allotted for a nice marble, and the kids' baths or guest baths, it might be a porcelain tile. So start with those selections, and we'll get a tile budget. Usually we'll get an overall budget for tile labor and tile material. And at a very high level, we'll go ahead and substitute in the contract an actual dollar figure, usually at the high level. But then we back it up with the detail of what's included. We try not to get too detailed on the specific cost, because we feel like the customer gets lost sometimes the more information they see. So we try to keep it at a higher level, get them excited about the project, focus on the build, the finishes, and let us do the detail work of the budget and managing that. Now, every client's a little bit different. Sometimes, engineers, accounting people want to get really deep into the details, and we'll go there if we need to, but we try to avoid that and really focus on the process, the materials, and the build, and let them enjoy that part of it and not get so focused on the nitty gritty of this tile's $2.97 a square foot.
No, I like that, Jason. I think it's important. I mean, it just shows that you really know your product, you know your numbers, because what happens is when you're looking at a house, you may say, okay, on this square foot house, on average, we're maybe 68 to 75,000 for countertops. We're maybe somewhere in this range. And what that allots to is, as you mentioned, a marble in the kitchen, an engineered quartz here, and then maybe a granite here, whatever it may be, for a solid surface. And then at least you have a range. So you're not so much, here's a square foot, but you know your numbers enough where if they stay within those confines and they don't go crazy, picking some prehistoric, onyx or something that's going to be 5 times the price, right? Then you should be good. I mean, it should be pretty relatively close, and there's going to be some ups and downs between line items.
Yeah, and again, it's trial and error, and it's knowing the customer, and it's really you have those customers that are super budget conscious that'll follow our guidelines to a T, and then you have folks that get in and they're like, yeah, I know this is what you allotted me, but I really want white marble in every bathroom, and I'm like, that's great, you can have that. It's going to take the budget up a little bit, and I always try to remind folks when we're going through that budgeting process to say, hey, we can do that for you. It's only going to cost you time and money is always our answer. Or, Jimmy, my partner, he's like, yes, we can do that. It's just time and money. So by the end of the process, the customer should be trained enough to know that, hey, if I add a coffered ceiling, you know what, it's going to cost me $5,000, so they get to the point where if they're adding stuff, they know there's going to be a cost associated with it instead of adding, and nobody's reining them in or telling them it's going to be more expensive. Subconsciously, they probably know it's going to be more expensive, but until somebody tells them, hey, you're adding costs to the budget, it's going to cost you more, they'll keep adding until somebody corrects them or at least gives them a price. But once they get those dollars associated with those additions, then it becomes real. And, it's just trying to be realistic and setting those expectations and keeping the communication line open throughout the whole design process.
Oh, I love that you said that, Jason. For anyone listening, that's super important. Just that communication, because some of this you kind of learn through experience, but I've seen where we have an idea of maybe, the millwork for the house, the cabinetry, and as if they're adding built-ins in every corner of the home and entertainment centers, quickly we can tell them this is going to be an upgrade, or, as your example, the trim. I mean, you do extensive trim work, Jason, but if they're having decorative wood ceilings in every room of the home, that's going to drive the budget. And it's important that we at least give them those options so that they can make that decision. So, and just to be forthright, I mean, one of the biggest issues I'm having right now, so in our market, which I'm sure is similar to you, is, the back end cost, I feel like we have a good grasp, right? The finishes. I have a good pulse for what trim work's going to be, cabinetry, appliances, flooring, backsplashes, countertops. I mean, this stuff is tried and true. We know the products that are out there. We're very familiar. What's really become a struggle is the front end side. We're seeing some huge movements, right? Lumber has gone double in the last 5 months. Concrete now we're being told shortage, and it's been difficult to get product out there. And then one of the major issues, I do a lot of hillside work. And so FEMA on a national level has had issues with our pad heights and grading and drainage. And that's complicated because now we have more retaining walls. We're having to build pads up. We're having to bring dirt in. And that's adding hundreds of thousands of dollars on some of these projects that we, weren't even forecasting because FEMA's telling us we have to put these pads so high because of flood, 100-year flood designs. And so I guess, how are you managing that aspect? Because that's where, the masonry, the concrete, the framing, some of these hard costs, you really can't VE or pick, a cheaper countertop material.
Right. So it's been a struggle. So recently, within the last year, I've never put in, when I've given somebody a quote, that, hey, this quote's only good for 30 days. So we started that earlier this year. So it's as the process goes and you give quotes, it just tends to linger. Maybe somebody's not in a hurry to start. Well, they see that 30 days, they know that, hey, the price is going to go up after 30 days. So that's one way we've tried to speed that up and protect ourselves.
Well, let me ask you this real quick, Jason, before you keep going. So when you have the 30 days, your projects are like mine. You're doing these, homes that are long. So you may sign a contract today, November. Okay, we're going to do this build. Let's just say we're going to do this build for $1 million, but you may not start framing because of the site work until February or March, right? And so how are you, I guess, working around that aspect with the vendors and with your clients?
So lumber, for example, as soon as I sign a contract, I mean, we're a very loyal a builder to our subs. So we've had the same lumber company, gosh, for the last 15 years. And as soon as I know that the deal is good, I'm calling and saying, lock my prices. And they'll usually lock me for X number of days, depending on the project. There is a limit to that, especially with the prices going up the way they are. Or once they lock it in, we'll ship that first load of lumber as soon as possible, so that whole project is locked in. The other thing we've done is we've started our budgeting process. Instead of doing a contingency overall for the project, maybe a 2 or 3% contingency in our budget, we've gone in to framing some of those high ticket items, and we're putting a contingency in there. So going forward, I don't know how I'm going to approach that with the customer. It could be, I'll share the downside with them if it comes down, or I'm just taking on all that risk myself. But I'm trying to find ways to manage that risk of the increase in all the supplies. So it's definitely not a perfect process. The good thing about the increase in lumber is everybody knows about it right now. So all my customers are asking about it. And it's real. I mean, you start putting an extra $50,000, $100,000 on a project that's $1 million. I mean, it's you can't hide that. So you gotta be prepared and adjust your plans accordingly.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've taken a similar tactic. I've seen where, especially with framing, which is a little bit, I would say, easier to quantify, even though the numbers have been all over the place, is we can say, okay, your framing package is 300,000, right? Lumber, material, trusses, the whole gamut there. But the lumber itself, maybe let's just call it 100,000, and we're going to add a $25,000 contingency. So we're not going to spend this. This is just there in case it goes up. But if it goes down, that's in your favor. That'll be returned back. And we've never done that before, but we've had to do that now because of the variance, because by the time we break ground till we start framing, I mean, it could be 6 months because of all the hillside work, right? There's just so much to that front end side, but what about, some of the other aspects of the front end? I don't know in your market. For us, we see it with drywall, lumber, or labor pricing, concrete, masonry. I mean, so these are things that are really hard to quantify because it's not as easy as saying, yeah, lumber can go up or down.
Yeah. So in the past, we've always, we may have updated our estimating, and we don't have a sophisticated estimating software. I mean, we go through each plan and we send it out now to all of our vendors that are going to touch this project. So we get a solid quote from them on each particular project, and we try to lock that price in. So in years past, we may had a square footage price for our painter, for drywall, for concrete, but we're updating that now per project just to try to cover ourselves for instances like this. And also what we've done on some of the bigger projects, like we've got a house coming up that's got the trim budget is more than most houses I've ever built. And we put that in, we bid it all out, but we put it in as an allowance and a dollar figure. Usually I wouldn't associate a dollar figure to that, but with everything going on, it was just a way to try and, protect us and everybody, and, be as open as possible with the customer.
So how do you lay that out when you have, just for those listening? So what Jason's doing is probably similar to us, where when you get a project, you have your design book, your specs, your architecture plans, you send that out, and you're getting a hard price, right? For all the scope that's in there. So how do you manage? Because one of the difficulties is that front end challenge where, say, this house you're giving this example has a lot of trim work. So there has to be some sort of identification from you on the plans to highlight all the ceilings that are getting treatment, right? All the walls, all, the doors, all the, everywhere that's getting that trim detail. And so you have to have at least an idea of scope. So when you send out for bid, you're making sure that none of the subs are missing that when they return their proposal to you.
Yeah, so that's when we get a good designer in who will actually work with the client, work with us, and we'll actually do sketches of the wall paneling, the ceiling detail, the crown molding detail. So we we try to back up as much detail as we can so there's less confusion. Anytime I leave too much area for confusion, it always seems to backfire. And then I'm, as the builder, the people pleaser, I'm like, we'll take care of it. We weren't clear that what was or wasn't included. So, and that's the trouble a lot of times with when you're building or when I'm building these houses, the clients are watching everything you're doing. And they might be building $1 million house and they're watching you build a $2 million house. When there's screenshotting or taking pictures of all the ceiling details of the tile or the steel doors, and they're like, well, I'm getting that right. I'm getting that right. I'm spending $1 million. And it's hard to tell a client that, hey, I know you're spending $1 million. One, it doesn't go as far as it used to. And, if you want all that, it's going to be $2 million, like the house you're referencing. So it all boils back down to those expectations and communications with the client.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that because we deal with the same thing. There's levels of all homes and the clients will have that expectation as we all do, right? And it's hard because they don't do this every day. And so they see things and maybe HGTV hurt us a little bit where they say it's $2,000 for a whole kitchen and cabinetry, right? And you just shake your head thinking there's no way that's possible. There's some elements there, but I think what's really important, as you mentioned, Jason, is you're setting those expectations, right? And the more clear you can be, the more scope you can have, that helps. And so how, from your side, just from an overall, having a business partner, there's a lot of companies that have partners and some are individual sole proprietors and, there's complexities in all different systems. And so how do you manage that between you and Jimmy, I guess, your role on a day-to-day?
Yeah, I enjoy having a partner because I have a lot of great ideas, but I probably also have a lot of terrible ideas. So it just gives me that sounding board. And that's the same with Gretchen. I'll bounce ideas off of her and I'll show her, either different ideas or what. And feel like that's terrible, and, hopefully there's lesser of those than more. But, with a business partner, again, it's just a sounding board. He has better strong suits than I do. Jimmy comes from a customer service industry background. So, I mean, he is phenomenal with the customer. And, I'm good too, but I may return a phone call within the day. He's returning phone calls within like 10 minutes. I just don't know. I'm like, how do you do that? So I like to get him out in front of the customers. And then, he's working better relationships with the subs and I'm with the architects. So we each have our specialties. So we definitely are two different animals, and he can tackle numbers better than say I can. So the two of us kind of create those synergies as we're working together.
Which is good. It is good to have that yin and yang a little bit. And then you see that with employees too, because which employees have certain strengths and you want to put them in opportunities, in positions where they can be successful, right? And utilize their strong suits. And I've seen that with my team, right? I look at it from there's incredibly talented people and there's some things they're amazingly good at and some that not their forte. And so you have to align them and make sure that they're always in those positions where they can be successful. So from your build time, Jason, if a client was to reach out to you today, say, we're looking at building a home, we have a lot, what's your typical pre-construction? You mentioned 4 to 6 months. Is that till you break ground? And then what's your build time? How does that range?
Depending on, we do homes from 500,000 to on up. So, we have some that we can build in 10 months from, the design time might be 2 to 4 months. but on average, it's 3 to 6 months or 4 to 6 months. And then our build time is usually a year. Some of the larger ones may go a year and a half or 2 years. But on average, somebody wants a $1 to $2 million house. It's in that 12-month build time. And I'd say that's typical, but there's nothing typical anymore. That the time frame over the last, I'd say 5 or 6 years, it takes me longer each year to build a house. I mean, as organized as we are, just with the decrease in subs and more construction activity, it just seems to take a little longer each year to build these houses.
And it's painful, right? Because the longer it takes, the more the client gets frustrated. We get frustrated. Costs go up for both sides. So how do you manage craftsmanship? I know that's something on a national level most of us are dealing with. So for you especially, Jason, I mean, you have homes that have an incredible amount of detail, trim work, as you mentioned, which means you need to have not only a good trim carpenter, but you need a good painter that can prep and paint that correctly. So, how are these mostly people that you've used? Do you see a turnover coming as some of them age? I mean, how are you dealing with the craftsmanship side?
Yeah, the fit and finish, I think, of our homes is really what sets us apart when anybody walks through our homes versus the competition. And, it takes a lot of time. I mean, we're very particular on who does the finish work. And we've been very fortunate to have, the same drywall crew. We've got a couple trim crews and one main paint crew that, we know the finish we're going to get from these guys, and it's going to be phenomenal. But we might wait a couple weeks for the painter to finish up. So we're always juggling the schedule, and we'll tell the customer up front, hey, we want Ramon to do your paint job. Just know when we get to paint, we're going to plan accordingly, but we might have some downtime. We're waiting on the painter. So, if that's the case, we'll try to either put a driveway in or do additional tile work. So we always try to get progress going on every house every day. It doesn't always happen, but we just try to juggle that schedule and wait for our guys that we enjoy. Because anytime we alter from our core group of guys, I'm always disappointed. I'm always redoing stuff. And we definitely don't use the cheaper guy. And we may not use the most expensive guy, but we're using what we think is the best guy who we've got an established relationship with. So we found that that's worked extremely well to, keep the level of our finishes up. And we're not doing 20 houses a year. So we do 10 or less houses a year. So we can usually juggle these guys around, and they may work for us and one other builder or something like that. So they're not mass producing trim jobs out there.
Which is good. And to put you on the spot, I guess. So, it's funny that you had talked about, try not to deviate from your core group, which I think is a great value to have as a company, especially in construction. So I'm sure you've had this question as I get on every project. Well, Jason, I'm your client. My brother is a painter. My cousin's an electrician. So-and-so's a friend of mine, so how do you navigate that aspect where the clients come in and say, I have so-and-so, would you be willing to use them on your project, even though you have your tried and true, trade partners?
So I try to think I get better with age as I build and I learn. For the most part, we politely decline. I will listen to my customer if they have somebody, and I'll want to understand who it is, what they do. And if it is somebody that I think could be a good addition to our team, I will go and inspect some of their work and meet them and maybe get some references. But from the get-go, my typical answer is no. I said, you're coming to Artisan because you like what we produce. Let me be the builder. You be the customer. Let me do what I'm good at. And for the most part, we don't intermix those subs. Again, anytime I've done that, it turns out to be a disaster. Somebody gets divorced, something always happens with their guy, and then my guy has to come in and finish it. But, since we've started Artisan, 5 years ago, or maybe even 6 now, maybe once or twice we brought in somebody else's crew, but we really try to stick tried and true. And Like I said, we're not trying to build 20 houses a year. We don't bid on a bunch of houses. If somebody comes to us, they want us to do it, and we'll take them through our process. Anytime I fall outside of my process, it it never has a happy ending. I'll have guys bring me a plan, and they've already done the plan. They're bidding it against two other guys, and they're like, "Hey, can you give me a price?" And in the past, I'd say yes, but now I'm like, "No, we're not interested." And it's just, it's not that I want to be this cocky builder, that I'm better than anybody. It's just, I know what's going to happen. They're going to pick the cheaper builder who's misled them on what it's going to cost. And they're going to call me when it's done and say, "You were right. It really cost X." And, they told me I could build it for $150 a square foot. You know what? It ended up costing 300, like you said it was. And, so, and they don't usually call me. It's either, they're either embarrassed to call, or I find out through the grapevine that they didn't have a great experience. So that's one piece of advice, that it's taken me a long time to understand that every customer is not the right customer for me. So it's sometimes better to say no than to take that customer who's going to be a pain in the ass for you. And when they start asking those questions, can I bring in this guy? Can I do this? Can I do that? Warning flags start going off for me, and usually I'll shorten the meeting as quickly as I can.
Well, it's funny you say that, because how often if we're walking into a Tesla dealership or Ford dealership, well, my brother-in-law can tint the windows, so and so can install, the tires and rims, and the sunroof and so forth. And so it's funny because you don't really do that in any industry outside of construction. And it's really important, as you mentioned. You kind of learn trial and error that, yeah, there is occasion. I'm sure you and I have found some good subcontractors or partners through our clients, but in most cases, the relationships with the trade partner and the client. So when you're calling them, Jason, "Hey, I need you here to meet the schedule," beyond, they're not really very receptive, unless you can vet some things offside. And I think that's really important to understand, those special requests. And you mentioned process, like how valuable is that if you have processes and you've already made these mistakes, it's easy to stand in front of the client and say, "No, this is the process, and here's why. Here's where it's going to cost you and I money in the end, and pain." And so we can help them steer clear with that communication. So going back to that, I guess, for you, Jason, how are you setting the expectation? Because just to give an example, it's funny. I have a client now that, some clients are, as you mentioned, they'll travel, they'll be out of town. They may visit the project every 6 months, and I have some that love to visit it on a daily basis. Right. And it doesn't matter to me, because I know that we can, with our processes, build a home, whether they're there or not. But some clients get really involved. Like, "Well, I like Sergio a lot. Like, he's doing the tile. I want him to be there, and I don't want this crew." So how do you manage, I guess, the quality side? Do you sit down and orientate your guys' expectation? I mean, some of you've been working with, just to make sure that they can dial in and hit your quality level. Are there certain crews that you request from some of the companies? I mean, talk us through that.
Yeah, we definitely have our favorites. Excuse me. Um, get me all choked up here, Brad. Uh, so I was just talking to my I was just talking to my plumbing contractor today, and they are a larger company. So we've chosen to align ourselves on all the mechanical systems. Our heating and air, our plumbing, our electrician are all larger companies that have at least a dozen crews or more. And we've chosen that because those are the parts of the house that stuff breaks down, stuff has issues, and it's usually on the weekend. So we want a solid company that's been in business for a long time, that has a service crew that's going to respond in a timely fashion. So the answer to your question is, do I have favorite crews? So I do. So with my plumber, there's a couple crews that I always request, and they know that, say I want Steve as my plumber. He's meticulous with his piping, and he always picks apart all the other plumbers, and I learn from him as to, what makes a good plumbing job. So I'll request my guys. And, we we do enough work that the guys respect our wishes. And, we mold, as much as we like these guys, we mold them into what they become. So we have a certain process, we have certain expectations. And by having the same guys on our job site, house and house again, they know that I'm not going to put up with crappy work. So if they're taking shortcuts or if they're just doing something not the right way, they're not going to want to show up on my job site the next house. So they do it right the first time, or we make them fix it. And, it corrects itself over time by having that same repeated group of guys building, because again, I'm not building the same house over and over again. So we try to follow that process, that we do things a certain way so we don't have major issues.
Oh, I love that you share that. I think that's really important because just that initial orientation when you're working with a new crew to have set that expectation of whether it be site cleanliness or quality, what you're expecting of them. And then as you're guiding them and teaching them and walking through, project number 2 is going to be better in 3 and 4 and so on. And so, as you mentioned, you use the term mold them. So it's more just creating that alignment, a vision of what you expect for them to do. And now they can be successful because that expectation's, set out for them.
So, like electricians, for example, we have certain checklists that we go through because, I don't like my plugs under windows because I'm usually doing some kind of trim work or paneling under there. So we don't put any plugs under windows, or on staircases, we're typically doing wainscoting. So the crews typically learn fairly quickly of what artisans' expectations are and where they're doing trim work, because it's so much easier to fix that stuff on the front end as opposed to when you're putting trim work up and there's a plug right in the middle of a cool decorative panel or trim work. So it's little things like that shows that you're paying attention to those little details, but it helps the finished product so much better.
I love that you share that because I think there's value there for anyone. The more, and we talk to our superintendents about this all the time, that know your design, know your spec book, and it's, in fact, have it memorized. Not that you have every specification memorized, but have a good feel for the house, no matter the size of the house, because electrical is a great example. As you mentioned with the trim work under a window, or if the designer has picked a decorative backsplash in the kitchen, you don't want these wall outlets, right? Countertop outlets. You'd rather do like a plug mold or something at the bottom of the upper cabinet that you don't see. And that's where it's really important to understand, what's, return on trim and casing, because do we have space for that, and how are we going to transition? And especially, trim is so key with outlets, because you just can't have that interruption, and trying to do that drywall stage is a lot more painful than when you're boxing it at frame stage.
Yeah. And having some fancy, the last thing I want to do is draw attention to a plug or a switch. And, if somebody's putting a big old 1x6 box around a light switch, it just drives me crazy. So we'll either try to put it above or below or somewhere inconspicuous. So we are pretty particular, but I think it gives you the end result that we produce.
Well, I think there's a good transition because speaking of the end result, which you know every time, Jason, I mean, anyone that's followed you on Instagram knows the level of quality and detail you're putting out there. So I guess my question for you is, you've had tremendous success on social media. So who manages that Instagram account?
So we've got an elaborate team of me. No, it's, it's something I have to thank Gretchen. She got me hooked on social media years ago, specifically Instagram. So it's my thing. I enjoy it. I manage it. I've never had anybody else manage it. I like having that personal interaction with the customers, with the followers, and it's just something that I enjoy. So, and I think that's why it's been successful for me. I know a lot of builders have other people manage it, and there's nothing wrong with that. They probably do a better job than I do, but I like being in the weeds as far as the social goes, because I get a lot of inspiration. I've met a lot of good friends. I've met you through there. So I think being involved, and if a builder can be involved with it consistently, it will help their business. I mean, I can't tell you how many people over the years that get motivated and are like, I'm going to get into social, and they'll post solidly for a week, and then they just die off. And they're like, man, it sucks. I don't get any business off Instagram. I'm like, well, it's a job. I mean, it takes time, and it's a commitment to be consistent with it. And if you are consistent with it, it will pay off.
It is. It's easy to get burned out. And I think a lot of people, as you mentioned, it's the consistency, right? If you're not consistent, you're going to lose that reach. And so for you, Jason, over the years, I'm sure you've learned a lot more about the algorithms and processes of Instagram that have helped, you strategically create your brand. But is there a technique? Like, how do you know what you're going to post each day or throughout the week? Is there a lot of thought behind that? Maybe a project's closing or a project's breaking ground that you want to touch upon? What's your strategy, I guess, and how far are you planning out your posts?
Well, first of all, you're giving me way too much credit for um, honestly, there was a time I probably was more into the algorithms and when I posted and posted more. But at the end of the day, what I tell people is post what's true to you. Post your best content that you can produce, and share that. I don't have a stock of 50 images. I still go by the Instagram. So, I usually don't know what my next post is. I'll go through my feed. I probably take, I don't know. I'm going to look at my phone here and tell you how many pictures I have on my phone. And it's probably, so I've got 56,000 pictures on my phone. So it's less than a year old. So I've taken those pictures, but I may take 20 pictures of a kitchen or a base detail, and later at night or in the morning, I'm an early riser, so I'll get my morning drink or something. I'll sit down and just flip through and be like, that's a cool picture. Gretchen's taught me some cool editing skills over the years. I think presentation is very important. So many people post dark images, blurry images. So I'll either edit it, or sometimes I'll just text Gretchen the picture and say, hey, can you lighten this up for me, or put your wow factor image filter on there, and she'll help me with that. But I think good content, clear and consistent, is super helpful for people. And just don't overthink it. And then you've got to be social too. I mean, you've got to be engaging with other people. If people comment, you've got to comment back, and follow like accounts. I mean, if guys inspire you, tell them they do. Go out and comment, and don't just say cool. Tell them why you like that image, and get to know people through your commenting.
I like that. And I think that's the one thing a lot of people miss is, social media be social, right? That reciprocity really rings true as you make connections online, from peers in your network and outside your network, that support. And I like that strategy. I mean, that's something I probably need to do a little bit better job with mine is, although there's a lot of engagement and I engage on others, it's more, there are some people that inspire me, such as you, Jason. And it's like, it's taking that time to, hey, this was really neat. I love that detail. I love what you did here. I love that process, ask questions, and it just builds that community. And I think that's the one thing people realize is, yes, there is some advantages to social media as far as lead generation and clients and product, but there's also a lot of value in the networking and the knowledge base. And as we've spoken about so much in this episode, is about processes and expectations, and why make all the mistakes yourself when you could be networking with other builders, in Louisville, and say, Jason, like, what do you do in this instance? How do you handle that? Right. And it's going to make me better as I'm developing my business development strategy for my company.
Yeah, and one other thing on the posting is, I know everybody wants a polished image or professional image, and I do think those are extremely important, and I try to post a fair amount of the professional pics. But I'd say at least half of my images are just images I've taken with my phone that are good lighting, good angle, good architectural interest. So I think some people wait for the perfect content, and it's not always going to be perfect. You just got to put what you feel is your best at the time, and you just got to put it out there. That's the same with the Instagram stories. So that's a better place to share in process stuff. I think recently I've probably gotten more engagement from my stories than my posts, and people love to see. And some days I don't do it every day. I try to post stories every day, but I don't. I'm more active than not, but just showing behind the scenes or why I do a certain detail or showing a view from a particular lot or a ceiling treatment, I think people can attest to that, because when I meet with clients, almost all of them have either screenshots of my stories or IG posts or an AFT kitchen image that they bring to me for that initial design meeting.
That is the fun part, right? As we see clients bring in our peers' projects, right? And then we actually know who built those. But I love that advice. I mean, you talked about, stories are super advantageous. So for those not doing stories, make sure you're utilizing that because it builds the personality, right? You can put the personality as you have, Jason, behind the company, behind the firm. You can show day to day your interest. I found that I'm not as good of a golfer as you, but I post things as I'm golfing, and I have clients that like golf and are like, Brad, we need to get out and play, and it builds that camaraderie. So it's funny how those little things make connections with people. And you talked about presentation, lighting, making sure it's good lighting, which I agree with. Lighting makes everything, authenticity, good content. I mean, that's a reality. You just put out good content. So how is social media? I mean, for anyone who's, they get on and off the wagon, of social media, but for someone who's been consistent for as long as you have, Jason, and you've built a great following there and great respect in the industry, how have you seen social media be a big benefit to you and your company?
I mean, it's probably, so as of now, I really spend no money on any outside advertising. We used to do magazines and ads and whatever. I've really cut all that out. And my focus has just been Instagram. And then we started a YouTube channel, Building a Better South, when we renovated a home last year. So those two have been my biggest lead generators, and they've opened so many doors for us. A huge example, and this is more credit to Gretchen for her style, but we helped GE launch a brand new brand called Cafe. A little builder designer in Louisville, Kentucky is helping a billion-dollar company launch a new product or a new brand, and it's all because of Instagram. And it's mind-blowing to me that that we can do that. So they approached Gretchen about helping launch their new matte white stove a year and a half or two ago. I can't remember, but I went to the meeting with her, and at the time I had 2 spec homes. I was like, well, let's build one house with the matte white kitchen, and let's do a matte black kitchen. It'll be side by side. And we partnered with GE, and they rented the houses from me for 6 months and hosted events. And as opposed to bringing people to their, artificially lit showrooms at Appliance Park, they're in a house in a community. And I mean, we're just a small part of, that Cafe brand, and we were one of many they used. But I think we helped set the tone for that brand, which has opened up so many opportunities for us. We've had, went to New York with Gretchen, and she built a display, and, with Cafe, and, so many other opportunities with GE. And then we did a show house last year with Fine Home Building and Our House Furniture, liked what Gretchen did and I did. And so they helped us furnish the whole house, and it was a great show house. And it was all because of Instagram. We've gotten house full of, lumber. I mean, all kinds of great perks have come from our Instagram.
And I love that you share that, Jason. It's funny because I will say you have a little cheat sheet though with Gretchen in your back pocket as your wife and designer, because she is ultra talented. And, I'm such a fan of her designs. I mean, Gretchen is truly talented. And so she needs to hear that on this podcast. But what's really neat, as you mentioned, just with the social media and the connection, I was fortunate to meet you both, is that it's a connector, right? And I had one of my guests that was on a few months ago, Maury, and he's based out of LA. And he said, when in the past as a salesperson or as, like LinkedIn, you can utilize and you can go right up the channel real quick and find out, executives and people to contact And Instagram's the same. It makes the community so small. And, Cambria had a function in Minnesota, and they had builders all across the country. So you win and Gretchen win and I win. And this was years ago. And here we are. I'm a small builder in Scottsdale, you're in Louisville, and builders all around the country. We built these connections, right? And working with these great brands. And had I not been on Instagram, had you not been on Instagram, we would not be partnering on this. And then here you go, fast forward now. So opportunities present themselves in many ways through social media. So there is a lot of benefit there.
Yeah. And I think, like I said, the biggest thing is you just got to put yourself out there, and you don't have to have 50,000 followers. There's micro influencers that have a couple hundred or a couple thousand followers. You're still influencing people. So you just got to start, and you never know where that opportunity will come from, and reach out if there's brands you like. I mean, that's where a ton of our opportunities have come from. James Hardy, Cafe, Our House. We love all those brands. LK Sinks, all those. We, have built some great partnerships with those folks, Moen Faucets, because we love the product. And not only, can you get paid for it, but you get to use the product, and, you truly stand behind it. And we really don't do stuff that we don't stand behind. I know you always hear that, but we truly do products that are tried and true to our style. And it just seems authentic that way. And that's the way we want to keep it.
Well, I love that, Jason. So what's upcoming and exciting for you guys at Artisan Signature?
Man, we have 2021 is going to be just a killer year. We've been really planning. We've got some amazing projects with some amazing clients. We're going to have an opportunity for builders, designers, anybody listening to the podcast to come to Louisville next summer. God willing, we've got some kind of cure or,
allowed to gather in public somehow through COVID, right?
Yeah. And even if not, we'll have smaller, but we're doing a national show house that we'll share more of soon. We'll be breaking ground on that here real soon, but it'll open next summer and run for about 6 months. So we're hoping to have some builder events, some designer events, and I think it'll give an opportunity on a smaller scale to get a lot of folks together and share ideas and just bond and learn from each other.
Well, that's exciting. So where can our listeners find you?
So Artisan Signature Homes on Instagram, Jason Black is the simplest way. And that's where I'm at.
Well, we can't thank you enough for coming on, Jason. We'll be following along, and maybe if we're lucky, get a trip out and visit you next summer and see this house.
I look forward to it, Brad. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Jason.